Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural meeting of the Representation Review Subcommittee. I have apologies from Councillor Lyle and Councillor Epihar. Can I have a mover for those, Lydia, and seconded by Mayor Sam? All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. So for the record, my name is David Wood. I'm Chief Executive of Selwyn District Council, and it's my role to open the meeting, to go over the agenda for the day, and to take charge of the election of the chair and deputy chair. But before we do that, I'll ask that members join me in our karakia. Whakataka hau ki te uru, whakataka hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā tara ki tai, e he aki ana te atakura, he teo, he hoka, he huho, ti hei moriora. Are there any conflicts of interest that anybody has? There are none. So the first duty that I need to do is to elect a chair and deputy chair. Can I please call for nominations for the position of chair of the Representation Review Subcommittee?
I move Phil to be chair.
Seconded, moved Mayor Sam, seconded Councillor Lydia. No other nominations? That being the case, Councillor Dean, congratulations on your appointment as chair of subcommittee, and while you're making your way up to join me at the top table, can I please call for nominations for deputy chair?
I move Lydia and Lydia.
Are other nominations? Gives me great pleasure, Councillor Lydia, to acknowledge your election to the position of deputy chair of the Representation Review Subcommittee. So just while the chair's joining me at the table, the purpose of today is to give an overview of the proceedings that we need to follow, procedures, should I say, that we need to follow for representation review leading through to the 2025 election. Most of it is statutorily governed with fairly tight timeframes, but it's just a matter of understanding what it is that we are required to do, and also talk generally about how we might get into community engagement processes over the next 12 to 18 months. So before I talk to the paper, Mr. Chair, are there any matters you wish to raise or speak generally to subcommittee members about?
No, not at all. I said that thank you very much for, so I feel honoured to be in this small group, which I hope will grow. I think that we have an opportunity here to shape representation of the district. I think we've got some great thinking going into the space. I think ultimately the way that Selwyn is shaped and even up to the next election is something that this group will be talking about. We need to be talking to our communities. We need to be talking to people, groups and individuals within the community, so to make our decisions that we make here as robust as they possibly can be, and therefore to be truly representative of what our community wants. And on that, David, I'll pass back to you and you can run us through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So look, I'm going to spend a little bit of time speaking to my report, which is on page 4, or starts on page 4 of the agenda. Just remind ourselves that this council last undertook a representation review during the 2021 calendar years in preparation for the 2022 elections. So statutorily, we've got to do this every 6 years. Section 19 of the Local Electoral Act, a copy of which is attached to the agenda for today, outlines the procedural steps and also the timelines that we have to proceed. The last review, the Local Government Commission and its determination made some key points. It acknowledged the strong growth that there's been across Selwyn and is perceived to continue across Selwyn, albeit it's not even growth. There are pockets of growth in certain areas. They asked that we undertake a robust examination, firstly, of communities of interest to see where they engage. ensure that the mechanisms are in place to allow community engagement. And one of the things we might want to talk about today is just how we put that in place, some of those creative things that we can do just to engage communities in the first instance. The Local Government Commission suggested that Council not only identifies the towns or townships that residents feel a sense of connection to, but also how the residents interact with each other. And those who recall the processes for the 2022 election would consider there were 27 different models that were put up at various times, looking at everything from 1 to 5 electoral wards and variations to the numbers of elected members as well. The Local Government Commission considered that undertaking those steps early in the review cycle will support Council to undertake more meaningful conversations with the wider community. Thus, this is one of the reasons that we're starting this process early. Amongst the things that we, the subcommittee, have to consider and make recommendations to Council on are firstly the electoral system. So we have always been a first past the post council. There is the option of STV, single transferable vote. Do we want to consider that, or are we comfortable with the first past the post process? The second one is Maori wards and constituencies. And when we talk about the terms of reference later on this morning, we will note that there are representatives to be appointed from our two runanga. We need to consider how we're going to engage with the runanga in the first instance. Also understand the legislative requirement to undertake a review of Maori constituencies, local authority resolution or poll of electors if we need to go down that path. But my strong suggestion would be engagement with the executive of the respective runanga in the first instance. We need to make sure that all of our decisions are governed on the premise of fair and effective representation. And three things that we need to give strong consideration to. Firstly, communities of interest. Second one is effective representation of those. So, of course, across Selwyn, we've got sparsely populated areas, certainly in the western ward of Melbourne Community Board, to fairly compact communities, Wollaston, Lincoln and Prebbleton particularly, and also fair representation of electors, and that's in terms of number of constituents, distance that your electoral ward covers, and also the extramural requirements that you would have representing those electors. We need to consider effective representation of communities of interest. We need to give some thought to making sure we avoid arrangements that might create barriers to participation. And one of those things might be the way we engage with our communities, the day, time. For example, again, in the terms of reference, it's suggested that we will have a youth council representative. We will consider that, but that will impact quite significantly on the day of the week and time of the day that we hold our meetings, for example. Making sure we don't split recognised communities of interest. So the group that had a look through this exercise 3 years ago, for example, looked at what we now know as the Wollaston ward and suggested that it is potentially big enough to split at least 2 different ways, possibly 3, and bear in mind that by the time we get to the 2025 election, the population of Wollaston will be well over 30,000 people. Also making sure we don't group together 2 or more communities that have few common interests. So which way are we looking? Are we looking east? Are we looking west? Are we looking north and south? So where do our communities interact? And not only within our own electoral ward, electoral area, should I say, but also in terms of neighbouring authorities as well. Talk about reasonable access to members. So again, this is around the representation numbers and also the members' ability to effectively represent the views of electors. So in that respect, we need to ensure the population of each ward. So the way we do it, it's what they call the plus or minus 10% rule. So we need to ensure the population of each ward divided by the number of members produces a figure of no more than 10% greater or smaller than the population of the district. So again, this is the geographic area of representation. We need to give consideration to community boards. Currently, we have one community board, and on this committee is the chair of that community board, Ken May. We need to consider the role and responsibility of community boards across the district, review the need to continue to have a community board, and also open up the question as to whether we need potentially more community boards, i.e. do we consider one within each of our electoral wards. We talk about the consultation process, and again, I think this is the opportunity, Mr. Chair, that this committee has to be a wee bit creative in terms of what it does, how it engages, asks the community what is important, and all of this comes back to the representation, areas of representation, and particularly communities of interest as well. In respect to effective representation, we will consider the accessibility, size and configuration of the district. As I said before, the existence of community boards, the electoral system and any Maori wards. And if I take you to page 38 of the agenda, and this is the last point I want to make, Mr. Chair, before we open up for questions or general conversation. Page 38 is a compact diagram reminding us what it is that we need to do. So 2 years before the election, we've got to consider whether we want to change our electoral system, so first past the post Rees TV, or whether in fact we want to keep that going. And we need to give strong consideration to the process of establishing or engaging in conversation around establishing of community boards and, as you were, Maori wards, and taking a position on that. And early in the next calendar year, 2024 calendar year, there's some more procedural stuff that we need to do there. I think the other thing that I would suggest that the subcommittee do, Mr. Chair, is just reflect a wee bit on the determination from the Local Government Commission, which is attached as Appendix 3, starting on page 39. Gives useful reference point to the process that the previous committee went through in terms of the considerations that it gave. As I say, there was said before, there was something like 27 different options, I think, that we traversed. The reasoning that was put into those, and also the determination from the Commission, which starts in their clause number 50. I'll find it in just a moment. Yeah, in fact, on number 50 it was. And this was very well articulated. They also talk about community boards from their clause 65 on. So that's really all I wanted to say by way of introduction, Mr. Chair. So what I wanted to do is just make sure today that the committee is aware of the process, has the opportunity to consider some of those things that we might want to talk about and the time frame to do that. We have a second meeting of this subcommittee scheduled for 14th of June, thank you very much, where we will further examine some of these and also maybe bring some examples of some of the processes that we went through last time. So happy to answer any questions.
Well, I've got a couple of questions, but before that, is there any questions from the floor?
Just go general business, I think, you know.
Yep. You up here, press your
yeah, your right hand button there.
your right hand button.
We'll turn it on. If you'd like to speak.
This is Sam. So what do you get first, Sam? You
So I thank you for putting this meeting together. I think it's important that we make use of the expertise David has before he leaves. And as has been noted, a lot of other people that were involved in this last time are also gone. So I think it's good for everyone to understand the history, I suppose, of previous decisions, but not be confined by what they were, but to be informed by them. I think that councils are elected to ensure that good decisions are made, not to be the ones to make every decision. And we need to think about what shape and size of a council moving forward and community representation we should have as a district. Not have one of every type of person from the district sitting around our council table, but what does good governance look like, and how practically do you get good outcomes from people in discussions, and how many people are required to make that happen, and how do we ensure that the views of the whole district can be included in the conversations that we have. The mana whenua timing piece, we have asked both Tautu Hereri and Te Taumutu Ruranga for appointees to all council committees. They are running different timeframes and processes for their appointees. Taumutu is likely to have their person appointed in June, and I think that Tautu Hereri, after talking with Tanya end of last week, is more likely to be July. Fingers crossed. So middle of the year-ish, but that won't be in time for our next meeting. After our next discussion, the Future for Local Government report's going to be released, and I think we need to think about how we set ourselves up for some of the recommendations that are in there as well, so that we make any transition, which I think is going to recommend more of a regional collaborative model, which we have seen through the water reform and the RMA reform, a focus on how we do things more as a region. I think we need to consider how, if we are to work in a new model that is regionally focused, how we would maintain good local community voice into the decisions that are valuable to us. And so our new structure, or whatever this process comes up as our structure, being able to really easily feed into that rather than having to rejig it again. Like let's keep an eye on the future as we do this work. And I think community participation is going to be really important in that. And so youth were talked about before, but there's subsets of our community that need to have a voice into this and won't be able to come to meetings like this, and probably don't want to necessarily come to meetings like this, but they do care about the way that we do this. So thinking about how we run events across the district at different times of the day to enable people to feed into us, as well as electronic feedback before, like really early on in the process, before we come up with models, because David talked about communities of interest and the things that might be different about our communities, but I think there's a whole lot that we actually all hold in common about Selwyn. And so thinking about how do we draw that out from people before we get to here's a model, what do you think about it, so that our models are informed by what our community thinks. And a good example of that is there's a lot of people that live rurally in Selwyn, and I don't think it matters whether you live in, at the moment, the Ellesmere ward or the Melbourne ward. There's a whole lot of things that are actually in common there, and what isn't in common is a line that predates 1989 that said we are separate people, rather than there's a whole lot of common interests that sit in the space. So trying to tease out some of that and understanding what shape fits us best going forward. David, you raised the STV first past the posting. I think that would be a good conversation to have with our community. I think STV gives a fairer outcome, but first past the post is much easier to understand. So just the practicalities of which system we use. The timeline that's suggested here, I'd suggest to you feel as chair that we try and beat all those timelines and do things well ahead of time. And there's no reason why we couldn't have this completed 6 months ahead of the final deadline rather than running things right to the end. Maori wards will come up, and I think I've said the community participation piece. I'm excited by this work. I think it's good. Let's keep future focused and think about how we connect with the community, and probably the two things that are front of mind for me on that.
Thank you, Sam. Shane, you want to make some comments on this particular report, or was it just general things you want to talk about later?
Talk about general things.
Okay, what are your thoughts on this representation group?
Yeah, again, I'm in favour of first past the post for relatively obvious reasons. I think the other one, you'll end up with a lot of dilly-dallying around while you get it sorted out. I'm just hopeful that we just recognise Rolleston particularly as being a large entity within the wider group, but we also need to recognise, as Sam alluded to, that the needs of the rural people are a lot different to the needs of the urban people, and I think to a certain extent that has been lost in recent times, and I'm just hoping that we can just keep moving in the right direction in recognising those needs. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I think that's a good point, and reflecting on what was Mayor Sam was just saying as well, is that this process can be a process where the community is effectively at our table as well, and the community voice is going to be loud at this table. I think you're right in terms of the rural versus the suburban, non-rural parts of our community. It's been around this table during council times. You often see the divide, and that's something that that's the communities of interest. And I think David was talking about that, and there's some great work that's involved in the documents that we've got. So thank you, David. Lydia, I've got a couple of questions. So Lydia, I'll go after you.
Yeah, cool. I think I'm actually really looking forward to this piece of work. I think it'll be really interesting. And I'm looking forward to seeing how we can engage our community more. And it could be quite interesting leading up to the next election, especially with Future for Local Government, once we take their recommendations on board and how we future-proof ourselves. But yeah, I think that consultation and engagement piece is going to be the most important, because effectively it should be our communities that decide whether it's single transferable vote or first past the post. And it could be a good chance for education around that piece, so that people actually understand what they both mean, because I think that there is a lot of people that don't know what single transferable vote is. And yeah, I guess you could have picked this one, but yeah, I've got a concern about the rural community being lost a little bit more. So I'm interested to see where we can take that. And I think Mayor Sam is right. Ellesmere and Melbourne do have a lot in common. So it'll be interesting to see where we go with that. And I'd be interested to hear Shane's views on that as well. And yeah, I guess community boards, it needs to be, are we more or less? And how is, it's all going to fit in. So like I said, I'm really interested to see this and how we consult with the community.
Yeah, the conflicting needs of the rural and the non-rural communities, are clear. And yeah, we need. It's great that everyone's talking about the same thing around the community voice, and I think that as we go forward, that can probably be the thing that we can make sure that this group, as most of our council things, are really listening to our community. And Sam, I liked your idea of the events that we can hold, around the democracy. That's one of the most important things for us is the democracy that we have. You're probably not using the word democracy, because that will just either put people to sleep or drive them away. I've got a couple of questions, David. Maybe you can clarify a couple of things for me straight away from your report. The 10% rule, just run that over me one more time.
So the best place to look is there's a table on a page in the back here, page number 42, as you were in mind. Thank you. So you can't have any elected member with 10% more or less constituents than anybody else. Across the district. So that's where the mesh blocking comes in, and you often need to swap communities, which we've done from Burnham in the past, West Melton in the last election, so that every elected member has the same number of constituents plus or minus 10%.
So a good example is that in that page 39 is Selwyn Central or Rolleston. Back in that's the time the last one was 17,880. for people, and that was plus 0.83. Okay.
Yeah, it's page 40. It's the table at the bottom of page 40 that I really meant to direct you to.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. The next one I have here is obviously the consultation timing. I wrote that down before you gave us the timing chart, which is perfect. The marries, the seats, Sam, is that something that would be we would rely heavily on the Runanga representatives to counsel on our groups, or would it be something that would go through the Runanga relationship group?
Through each, I think we would want to seek the views of each Runanga separately. Than the group that would sit here, but I'm sure the members that would sit at this table would also bring the views of their Runanga to this conversation. There are also Māori living in Selwyn who are not affiliated with either Runanga, and their views need to be considered through this as well. And I know Councillor Epiha wants to raise that with the group when he's at the next meeting.
And it is tough. I mean, there's the tangata whenua versus mana whenua, and that's we're going to hit the head on. I suspect.
So we need to consider both.
Both. Yeah. So going from the timings that you've got here, David. The first things we need to be looking at is our electoral system and the Māori wards, and our timing for that is November this year.
Correct. For
consideration for February next year.
Correct.
So do we use those two items there? Well, I suppose first thing we do is we need to see who's sitting around the table here. And the council has asked us to consider having youth and also having Runanga representation here. What are the thoughts about the constitution of this group? I'll throw that out to
So, Mr. Chair, just before we do that, that's part of the discussion on item 7, terms of reference,
right?
Which we'll come to very shortly.
In that case, we'll deal with the rest of the report first. So the report is that the executive's report representation procedures be accepted. Would someone like to move that we accept David's Sam, seconded Lydia?
Can I, just before you take the vote on that, can I give you a few starters for 10 that I think might be helpful? The meeting of the 14th of June, I think it would be appropriate to bring in our planning staff just to put the growth model in front of the committee so that you can see, we know that we're fast growing, but it's disparate. There are tight pressures, as I said before, particularly in the urban areas, but we need to preserve or pick up and preserve the urban versus rural. Ken talked about it, Lydia talked about it. So growth, to understand where the growth model is going to go over the next 6 years, I think would be very important. The other thing I think we need to do at the next meeting is look at the community board delegations. Ken again made reference to those. We just need to remind ourselves, what is it that we're asking the community boards to do? And as Mayor Sam alluded to with the Future for Local Government, what is the likely change to not only the sector role and responsibilities, but how they would be governed in the future? I'd also be interested in hearing reflections about our current model. So there's some fairly significant changes made last time. So reduced the number of councillors from 11 to 10, considered a number of options in those 27 that were divided from district at large to, I think, 5 models. We looked at it, five ward boundaries. The 2 popular ones were 10 councillors over 4, 9 councillors over 3 wards. So just reflect on that and ask, does the current model work? Is the representation effective? Particularly think about West Melton. We brought those into the Melbourne ward. We did a finance session with the community board last night. And correct me if I get these numbers wrong, Ken, but I think Melbourne community board ward has gone from 4,600 households to 7,900, or something like that. I think a starting point, Mr. Chair, might be to get some comms out into the community about the work that's going to have to be done and start with community clinics. So, hey, we are going to be at a range of places, and I'd suggest be pretty liberal with that range of places so that we can firstly articulate what it is that we have to do under Section 19 of the Act, but more importantly, to allow locals the opportunity to identify some of the issues that they actually want consideration given to. And that's this, do you look left, do you look right, north, south, etc. But the key advice I would give the committee is start early. And that's why we're meeting today, is just to understand some of the principles, get our thought processes in a row, acknowledging that there are new people at this committee table. So that would be the advice that I would give the committee, and maybe we can, if you are agreeable to some of those things, certainly on the next agenda, get the growth model and get the community board delegations, and maybe get a list of places or events that we want to go and talk to.
Thank you, Doug. That's great. Anything the floor can think that they would like to also add to that 14th, the focus? I think that's a great four-prong focus there, David. Thank you.
Can I add a fifth?
Yes, sure.
And that would be,
do I have a choice?
Yeah, you do actually. Yeah.
Carry on.
A choice to accept it. It's around engagement with the Runanga, and I think it would be prudent for the chair and the mayor to initiate an engagement with the executive of the two Runanga ahead of the formalised process, just to let them know what it is that we're having to do and why we're doing it.
I think that five-prong approach sets a really strong start, and I think it gets us off the board early, and certainly around that community consultation and the range of places that we can go to is going to reflect what we've been talking about here about going forward. So before we go accept your report, is there anything else you'd like to add? Okay, so Sam.
Yeah, I'll just, if you're requesting things for the next meeting, are you doing that now or later?
I was going to do that later, but
I can wait till later then for the next meeting.
Yeah. Oh, we'll do it at the end. Yeah. Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder for receiving David's report. All those in favour? Against, abstained, carried. Moving on, the next thing on the agenda is the appendices. No,
Yeah, terms of
adoptions of the terms of reference. Right, the terms of reference. David, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, well, this was the thing that you were speaking to earlier, Mr. Chair, around the membership of this group. So we acknowledge that we have to confirm Runanga representation and also confirm Youth Council representation. So these were suggested by Council when I set up this committee and adopted the terms of reference. But I think we just need to be mindful of how that would work, because certainly you're not going to get that full representation at a meeting this time of day or maybe this time of week. So just how we want to engage with that or whether.
Okay, any comments, questions around that? Sam?
Yeah, I think we need to be really flexible with how we get people involved in this process, and if that means this meeting taking place at some other time and place other than during a weekday working hours, I'm fine with that. And if that makes it easier for young people or people that don't live or work near Rolleston to attend, we think about how we move things around or make it easier to engage online, make it during lunchtimes, and they can join via Zoom. Like, there's lots of different ways and models we could use. So I think flexibility is going to be key in that space, and happy to work with you, Mr. Chair, through the with Martina about their representatives. I think it's important that for the consistency of decision making, that this people that sit on this committee will also be those appointed to all other committees of council. So we're kind of caught in that process and waiting for those outcomes. And are you wanting things for the next meeting now?
Yeah,
or you don't know
you can.
I just wonder for the next meeting if we also ask the chair of the Local Government Commission to respond on the things that they have seen and seek their suggestions about models moving forward. They will also be able to reflect on where they see the future of local government stuff happening, and they'll also be able to give us examples of best practice, which they have shared with us last year, David, or 18 months ago now, that kind of information I think could be quite helpful, because in the end we are responsible to them for this piece of work, and so hearing from them at the very beginning could be a good thing. And secondly, two other things. One is to have our comms and engagement staff prepare some proposals around how they think the best way to engage with the community is, so that we are actually going to talk about something of substance rather than just throw ideas around at the next meeting. And there was one other. I'll come back to me.
So you can just run the last one. So the comms and engagements.
Yeah. So that we get a report on the next agenda that would include proposals for engagement with our community. So that when we're talking about what that could look like, we've got some concrete examples and some staff in the room to advise that. And lastly, thinking about how other councils do it. So last time we visited and talked to, it was on Zoom last time, we visited the time before, different councils around the country to see what changes did you make during the last representation review? How has that gone for you? What's your model that you work with? So we could have that, but to start with, we could just be shown 4 or 5 different models around the country that are all different from one another and different from the current model we run, to show what the variety currently looks like. And then following that, we might want to set up some conversations with councils who do run it differently. For example, a council that runs STV as opposed to FPP is going to have some different views on how that model works. It'd be great to hear from them, and for this group to hear from them.
So a good example of that was Ashburton, wasn't it? So we engaged quite heavily with Ashburton because they were going through their review process, and their outcome was significant reduction in the number of councillors. Yeah.
Dave, do we need anything formal to request a report from staff, or is it?
It'll be noted as an action point. Okay. So yeah.
Lydia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, as the appointee to the community board, would you like me to approach them? We have a meeting on the 31st of this month, where I could have discussion with the youth council.
So you say community board, you mean youth council? Yep.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
I was going to say Ken, mate.
Yeah, no, sorry. Youth council. Yeah. Do you want me to have discussion with them around?
I think to feel them out, that would be a good starting point. Yeah.
And so what times?
I'm happy to come to that as well. Yeah. On the technical side, if you wish.
Yeah.
And if you'd like me to be, I'm happy to come along too. But then I'm also aware that you could probably, as deputy chair, just do that place out.
Well, I could just wait for a delegation from yourself and.
No, I won't go. David will help you out.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Is there anything else on this terms of reference? And thanks for adding those points in, Sam. You don't remember your third point yet?
No, that was the seat use of other councils.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah.
So as I said earlier, it's fairly prescriptive in terms of what the legislation requires you to do. And pages 50, can't see the number without my glasses. Page 59, 60, 61 are a good, and 62 are a good summary of. Those are the pages you need to keep in your back pocket just to make sure that you're following that correct process.
I think between now and our next meeting in June, we've got a really good opportunity. They say we've started early, so we've got a good opportunity to actually start to have some of these conversations and to get so when in June we can actually hit the ground with some really solid stuff. And I love the idea of the reports and everything coming back, and what do the other councils look like, and the successes. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to colour it in Selwyn colours, and as we go through and reflect on what other people have done. I also want to move that we accept this report.
Just a couple. Did you want to?
Sorry, Ken.
Yeah, I was just going to ask 2 questions. Are we aware of any group that uses STV?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And is that Ashburton?
No. Dunedin and is Hawke's Bay Central Hawke's Bay? Yeah, that's quite fair.
Yeah, so, okay. The second question is, do we have our discussions with the Runanga together, or do they operate individually and therefore you negotiate with them individually?
Individually, yeah.
Okay.
And look, that's a good point about STV versus FPP. I mean, when nationally, when it was just decided, there was a lot of conversation around it, and it was very confusing with all the options coming on the table. Then there's, so it would be an interesting conversation for us too. Right, someone like to move that we accept this report?
Can I just make one other comment?
Yes, of course.
On the 21st of June, I mentioned the Future for Local Government report will be tabled. I wonder if following that, we request Jim Palmer to come and talk to us and give us his view of how we might set ourselves up thinking about that future state of local government. Just have that input into our decision making. I think 14th of June is our next meeting, which will be too early, but the one after that could work well. And secondly, do we have a time? Are these meetings every 6 weeks, every 2 months? It would be good to have the diary, I think, set for the rest of the year.
These two sit around me.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, if we think about scheduling with staff when the next meetings fit between now and the end of the year.
Well, let's get through this. I suppose, but actually, we can't. This is part of the terms of reference, I guess. What are the thoughts around the table? How often? Bear in mind that we're speaking for about 30% of the group. I think probably. Well,
I think initially you need to go monthly because you are a new committee. You need to understand the process, and particularly if you agree at your next meeting. Particularly if you agree at your next meeting that you're going to do some wider community engagement, you're going to want to do that sooner and get the feedback on the table sooner.
If we start monthly, then we can always drop it back later on anyway. So, general consensus around monthly.
Monthly is good, and if we don't need it, we'll cancel.
Yeah.
And also give consideration to day and day and time.
Yes. Good point. Well, obviously the next one will be probably at a similar time to what we are now, because already in the diary, and at that meeting we'll have some. Hopefully, we'll have some youth feedback, and that can be broad. It can be any time, any day, as Sam was saying, via Skype or Zoom or whatever. Smoke signals. Yeah.
It may work well. They have consultation pieces that they need to do as part of their work, so it could be something that fits in quite well, so they can engage to the wider community.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move that and a seconder. Thanks, Ken. All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you very much. We will move on. Next item on the agenda is there another?
No, the item 8, we have effectively talked about the procedure, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
One thing that I'll be interested in hearing though is just around the table reflections on the current system. So there were some significant changes made for the 22 election. 6, 7, 8 months into that now, aren't we? Is it got the right feel about it?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go in the room. Sam.
I think we would be better served by having a community board in every ward, or not having a community board. I think that at the moment that the mixed space of not being quite sure that we delegate lots to the community board, and then other communities not wanting anything to do with having a community board. I'm not sure the mixed model gets the best out of community flow back into us, and especially with the changes around community committees. I think having formalised presence as far as the connection through community boards that Melbourne has everywhere could be quite good. Otherwise, I don't think the delegations, which David's mentioned, that will get to next meeting, are significant enough to really warrant a whole lot of work that goes on and the time that Ken and the other community members put in. So I think that's a big challenge for us. I think that boards tend to operate well at between 6 and 8 members, and more than that, there can be a whole lot of repeats that go on around the conversation. I get that a community often wants to feel like they've got their person sitting around the council table, but the effectiveness of that person, once 5 people have said the same thing, do we really need to hear the 7th and 8th time of that thing being said? So I don't think you'll find many boards outside of a council setting having that many people, and I just question the value of I think we should question the value of that conversation and how we get to an outcome there. We dropped one councillor last time, and yeah, I think we could look at models that have less. Equally, some councils have heaps more, and that might be the feedback from our community too. So I'm open to hear from our community where they think that sits. And I think it's functioning okay. I do think that we have just taken easy steps around change to not shake the boat too much post 1989, and we'll keep the names of our wards about the same. We've kept the boundaries of our wards about the same. We've just added a councillor or taken away a councillor every time the conversations come up. I think the driver for that has tended to be the pathway of least resistance, rather than how do we get the best councillor elected to make decisions for Selwyn. And that fits in there somewhere, but it's tended to be the least resistance path, I think, has been the winner at the end of most conversations. So I think we should challenge that as well and think about what's the best shape moving forward. Those would be my reflections.
Yeah, I think one of our biggest issues is overcoming public apathy, and that was reflected in this last election with the community board, with Sean and I in the Hawkins subdivision being elected unopposed, Bruce Russell and Calvin Payne being elected unopposed in the West Milton one. Whether West Milton sits in Melbourne or whether West Milton sits in Rolleston is open for revisiting during this process, and I would hate to think they were being ping-ponged around. I think we've got to either sit with a decision so that they have some degree of certainty, or we do put them back to Rolleston, and that creates a Rolleston North or something like that. I don't know what the answer is, but we've got a period of time now to look at those sorts of things, and I think those are the significant decisions that we need to be really, really looking at carefully. So,
Thanks, Ken. Yeah.
Well, I think that, the interesting part will be the communities of interest and seeing where they sit and who they align themselves to. I know that West Mountain was particularly hesitant and they weren't that impressed about being merged to the Balvin ward, but I think that potentially won them over, and they feel happy where they are now. So we need to give towns more certainty so that they can actually feel like they belong somewhere, rather than moving around. And half of West Melton still does associate themselves with Darfield, the more traditional part of West Melton, and the newer part is more urban. So it's looking at those townships, but I'm fairly happy with the way things are, but there's definitely need for discussion.
Yeah. I think it's a really exciting time to be talking about this, and thank you, David, for starting this process so soon, because we've actually got 2 years plus a little bit more to actually to get this right. I am worried, and having not really known much about the past, I'm going to reflect a little bit in the future. With the future of local government about to come to descend on us, it's going to be critical when we start talking about levels and community boards and boundaries and things like that. That's really going to shape us. If they started to talk more about much greater councils over much greater areas and district seats and unity and all that sort of thing, that's going to have an effect on us as well. Rolleston's a big behemoth and a beast, and of course it's suffering from growth. How we work on that? Do we carve it up? Do we keep it as it is now with the 3? I don't know what the answer is, but I'm really excited to be examining that. And in fact, that could actually be also the answer for, and I don't know whether West Mountain would ever like to be called Rolleston North, but we can give it a go. Maybe Lincoln can be Rolleston South at the same time. We can give that a go too. But I think that probably whatever they are, there's going to be now's the time that these changes will probably happen. And as Rolleston's grown to the size that it is, it will start to reflect other big communities of that same size. Yeah, that's it. I don't have anything else for you, David. Do you have anything else from you?
No, I just want to thank everybody for engagement today. The purpose was to give an outline of what the processes were and the timeframes that we need to follow. So comfortable, Mr. Chair, that we've done that, and look forward to the next meeting on the 14th of June. Thank
you. I do not have a karakia to end it, the meeting. So I'm frantically trying to find one as we're speaking.
And what's that?
I'm
Just going to the last council.
That's what I'm doing that.
Just while Naomi's grabbing those for us, are we confirming 10 o'clock for the next meeting on the 14th of June? After the council meeting? Even better.
Okay, nothing more for the meeting. I shall finish. Sam,
just the timing of that meeting. The morning has got a council site visit to Taitapu, which I'm not sure we'll need to go back to Taitapu. There's a couple of those other visits. Do we want to keep the morning free?
Yeah.
Or would you rather we did this meeting in the morning?
Well, I think that if we could do this meeting in the morning, that would probably be a better way of doing it as opposed to in the evening, because the evenings tend to be get filled up with other things as well. So
if this committee asks that, I'll circulate that to councillors and David.
So 10 o'clock?
Yeah, 10 o'clock.
Yeah, because if we've got external people coming in, it would be more suitable during the day.
Is that suitable for Lydia and Ken? Yep. Okay. All right, I'll finish with the karakia. Una here, te po, kia watia, ai kia watia. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.